All right, well, this is what I warned you guys might happen. Get this. Later, Alvarez's promoter is saying Gilberto Ramirez is asking for millions. This is in reference to the four-man tournament that the WBO recently proposed for what is interim status that could lead to a full-fledged world title. Yvonne Michelle, who co-promotes Alvarez with Top Rank, explained, Ramirez is currently pricing himself out and likely won't take part in the tournament. Ramirez, inactive since April 2019, is reportedly having issues with Top Rank. There is talk that Ramirez is attempting to buy out his contract to become a free agent. If Ramirez is pulled from the fight, there is a chance that the WBO will allow Joe Smith Jr. to take his place in the tournament. The Ramirez clan is not keen on facing a later. They're asking for millions. We at Jim and Top Rank are still accepting the challenge presented by the WBO, and Ramirez has until 8:30 this morning to accept the WBO's order from his side and agree to negotiate, explained Michelle to the Montreal Journal. Now, in the spirit of fairness and calling it down the middle, you have to take into account that this is only one side of the story, that this information is coming from Eleider Alvarez's side of things, via Yvonne Michelle, his promoter, co-promoter now, because Eleider's co-promoted by both Jim in Canada and Top Rank here in America. So this is only one side of the story. But if this side of the story checks out, why would Zurdo Ramirez require millions upon millions of dollars to fight the likes of Eleider Alvarez? Eleider Alvarez is a good fighter. We're not talking about his ability to fight, you understand. We're talking about his marquee value. That Eleider Alvarez is not a big draw, pay-per-view attraction. He's not that kind of fighter. He's a solid fighter. He's definitely a somebody in the light heavyweight division. But what he's not is a marquee guy. So why would Zurdo Ramirez require millions upon millions of dollars to fight that guy, unless he was looking for a way out? Unless it's what I told you guys before in my previous video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box, that if it were Zurdo versus Salimov, I think that Gilberto would participate in the tournament. I think that Zurdo wouldn't need millions upon millions of dollars to fight Salimov. But because it's Eleider Alvarez, a more proven, more dangerous fighter in a light heavyweight division, all of a sudden, Zurdo needs compensation. He needs a financial incentive to participate in this tournament for what could lead to a full-fledged world title. I told you. Now that Eleider's in the mix, well, Zurdo's not going to be too crazy about that fight. He's not, even though it's for a world title. And if Zurdo tries to hardline these guys, he's only costing himself an opportunity, because if he doesn't participate in this tournament, the only thing that's going to happen is he's going to lose his spot. He's going to lose his slot, his prime position to become a two-division champion. That's the only thing that's going to happen. The show will go on because the show must go on. Could be that Joe Smith Jr. ends up in that spot. Could be just about anybody via the WBO's rank standings. But if Zurdo does not comply with this order, if he does not abide by this mandate, he's only costing himself the opportunity to become a WBO champion at 175.
Pretty much.
And, you know, I cut Zurdo slack for all the things that didn't happen at 168 because it was a very political division at a very political time. You had world titles, you know, on separate sides of the street, you know, different outfits, and certain fights, as we all know, are stifled whenever this is going on. That if some of the belts are over there at the PBC, well, a top-ranked guy might never get to fight for them. So I understood that. And I didn't hold it against Zurdo because what was going on there was bigger than just Zurdo Ramirez and his career. But I also said that at 175, he don't got those excuses because most of the who's who guys are right there on the same side of the street as him. And it's about time that he makes something happen because his reign at 168 was
pretty mundane.
Rather uneventful, okay? You don't have those excuses at 175. And what do we see? We see static. We see friction. That it's different here. If things aren't happening here, it's not because you don't have the opportunities, it's because you don't want them. On the top-ranked side of things, here at 175, he has access to all the kinds of fights with all the kinds of fighters that he didn't have access to before. On the top-ranked side of things, you got access to the unified champion, Artur Beterbiev. You got access to the former champion, Alexander Gvozdyk. You got access to Eleider Alvarez. A fight with Joe Smith Jr., they could make that too. They made it for Jesse Hart, they could make it for you. A fight with Sullivan Barrera, same principle. All the who's who players, or most of them, are right there on the same side of the street that Zurdo's already on, the side of the street that he's been on. So if things don't pick up now, we can't blame it on the politics. This time, it'll be your fault. And that does appear to be, more or less what's going on if this story from Yvonne Michelle checks out. We know that Zurdo, very recently, or at least, recently enough, he parted ways with his former trainer, and he parted ways with his former manager. He gave his team a complete overhaul, and now Zurdo Ramirez is managing himself on his own behalf. At this time, we're hearing that this guy, he might be actually attempting to buy out his contract. So, if Zurdo Ramirez is trying to get away from the top-rank side of things, he would in effect be getting away from the best fights the division has to offer, because most of the belts are on that side. The only belt that's not on that side of the street is the WBA title, which is in possession of Dmitry Bivol. Is it possible that Zurdo Ramirez is trying to act on his own behalf to get away from Top Rank and perhaps take a more lucrative deal over there at Matchroom? I think that's a possibility. I think he sees the kind of money that Eddie Hearn's fighters are making fight by fight, and perhaps he wants a piece of that action. I don't know how much money, I don't know how much of it he can get, because he's not a world champion. If he were a world champion, there'd be a good chance they pay up the wazoo to get him over to their side. But as it stands, he's not in possession of any world titles. You're just a contender now. It's also possible that Zurdo Ramirez might want to make a similar move to the move that Ray Vargas, the WBC champion at Super Bantamweight, a move that he just made. I dare say Zurdo might decide to go to the PBC side of things. Oh yeah, it's possible. If he wants to get away from the best fights the division has to offer, what better place to do it than on PBC Island? Where the most he'll have to deal with is two guys in their mid to late 30s, Badu Jack and Jean Pascal, and what is a very chinny Marcus Brown. Those are the ponies that the PBC has in the show at 175. That's the most that Zurdo would have to deal with on that side. And we all know the PBC, they do need to beef up their light heavyweight stable, because that's all they got. So I think they'd actually be accepting of Zurdo Ramirez in this situation. They might actually help him to buy out his contract and bring him over to their side. I wouldn't lose much sleep over it, because, well, even if Zurdo goes to the PBC, so long as the world titles, the full-fledged world titles, so long as those titles aren't being held up by any of the PBC's fighters, who gives a shit?
Fuck him.
Fuck it. Let him go to the PBC side of things, where he'll be sparsely active and likely fighting for lesser versions of full-fledged world titles. Maybe they'll get him a WBO Latino belt, or, WBA Turquoise, WBA Gold, WBA Onyx, WBC Chinchilla belt, Enchilada belt. All he's going to be able to fight for at 175, if he goes to the PBC, all he's going to be able to fight for are lesser versions of the full-fledged world titles. But if he doesn't have a problem with it, why should we? So long as the full-fledged world titles aren't being held hostage, it's inconsequential to us. If by some chance it's not the PBC where Zurdo goes and he decides to go to Matchroom, well, on the Matchroom side of things, he would have Dmitry Bivol to contend against, Callum Johnson. These are good fighters, solid fights for the likes of a Zurdo Ramirez. So I wouldn't complain in that situation. It would actually be a good move. You make a little bit more money, and you've still got Bivol there, a very formidable world champion at the weight. So wouldn't really complain about that. But if Zurdo goes to the PBC, the only way that I can interpret that as, the only way I can wrap my mind around it, is that this guy, he didn't want to fight Beterbiev or Vosdick or Alvarez or any of the real solid fighters at 175. If you end up going to the PBC, looks to me like you wanted to get away from the big fights. That's the only way I can interpret that. Let's see if that's how it happens. In heavyweight news, get this. Andy Ruiz, Manny Robles part ways. The trainer is not surprised. Section of the article reads, after winning the first bout, Ruiz partied for 2 months. He started training camp way too late and entered the rematch out of shape, a bloated 283.5 pounds on the scale. He was unable to put his punches together. He was much slower in the ring, and all of that allowed Joshua to easily reclaim his titles with a lopsided 12-round decision. Since that loss, Robles has barely had any contact from Ruiz, so the veteran coach was not surprised when Ruiz's father reached out on Wednesday night to advise him that his son was going in another direction. I've seen it coming. I'll be honest with you, Robles said to Steve Kim of ESPN. I've seen it coming during camp. I saw it coming. Andy was just doing whatever the hell he wanted to do. The dad, obviously with him being the manager, he just had no control over his son. None of us had control of him for that matter. So I just saw it coming. It wasn't going to work because he wasn't listening. He's not listening to me. He's not listening to his dad. He's not listening to anybody. He said it himself after the press conference in Saudi Arabia. He apologized to me, to the dad, because he fucked up. So I figured, okay, it's only a matter of time before I get the call. Fortunately for me, Andy took the blame on himself and didn't sit there like the majority of fighters and blame the coach. This is a very curious turn of events. It is. Because even though Andy Ruiz is not directly blaming Manny Robles for what happened in the second fight and how he approached it, how he prepared for it or didn't prepare for it, while he's not directly blaming Manny Robles, you can make the inference that in his own mind he might be because he's changing trainers. And it's funny because if things worked out the way that they did, that has very little to do with Manny Robles. Manny Robles can't go in there and fight the fight for Andy. And he certainly can't forcibly make Andy put in the work, make him prepare properly for what was the rematch. None of this is within Manny Robles' power to do. So you do wonder if this is going to make any difference at all for Andy, because Andy was the one with the problem. Not Manny, not Andy's father. It was Andy who more or less had the problem, at least what they describe as the problem. In truth, I stand by my original position that so long as Anthony Joshua decided to fight that kind of fight, an outside, long-distance, mobile, outside kind of fight behind his left hand, there was never very much Andy could have done about that, whether he would have approached the fight in shape or out of shape. Because that's exactly the kind of fight that you have to fight against a guy like Andy. A mid-range to inside counterpuncher with slow feet but very heavy hands. So long as you're keeping that guy on the outside at the end of your jab, there's not going to be a heck of a lot he can do about it. And that's how Anthony Joshua approached the second fight. It was a winning strategy. Maybe Andy could have made it a little bit more competitive had he approached the fight more in shape. Maybe. But, I'm of the opinion that this was the fight that Anthony Joshua was supposed to have fought the first time out. And he learned his lesson, and he decided to go ahead and do that in the rematch. There never would have been much that Andy could have done against that safety-first kind of style, because he's not opening up enough for you to implement your counterpunching. He's keeping you out. Nevertheless, Andy has so decided to part ways with Manny Robles in light of what took place in that rematch. And that there's a question as to whether or not this is going to make any difference at all, because I reiterate, it wasn't Manny Robles that had the problem. Manny can't hop on the treadmill and lose the weight for you. He can't jump inside of your brain, inside of your mind, and make you start taking things seriously. So replacing him might not have any bearing at all over Andy's disciplinary issues moving forward. It's Andy that's got the ticker problem, not Manny. I don't know. Maybe those two guys don't have the best synergy, the best rapport, and maybe Andy can get what he's looking for, more or less, in another trainer. I mean, yeah, it's possible that maybe he has a better relationship, achieves better synergy with someone else, someone who can whip him into shape. It's just that, isn't that what Manny Robles more or less did in the first Anthony Joshua fight? I mean, that was the biggest fight on the biggest stage that Andy Ruiz has ever been on. And it was Manny Robles that helped him prepare for that. If there were any differences between what happened in the first fight and what happened in the second fight, it wasn't because of something Manny did. So, I mean, what good does replacing him do? You can't discount the role of Manny Robles behind, maybe him and Andy don't have the best synergy, when you know what? Their synergy was good enough that Andy was able to shock the world, and that was in a fight that Manny helped him prepare for. So I don't want to marginalize that. I don't want to trivialize that. I don't want to belittle that we can't downplay Manny Robles' role in things now behind the explanation that perhaps him and Andy don't have the best rapport, when whatever rapport they had, it really was enough for them to shock the world. They did that together, and it was Andy's commitment that was waning, not Manny's. So Andy gets a new trainer. Maybe things start off okay. Maybe Andy Ruiz shows improvement, shows conviction. Yet again, maybe he does under a new trainer.
Yeah, maybe.
That don't mean that Andy's ticker problems, his discipline issues, aren't going to show up with some new guy. They might show up with some new guy the way they showed up with Manny Robles. You can be a champion, achieve success, but you only really stay a champion by how you handle that success. And Andy handled his haphazardly, partying for 2 months, knowing
that the rematch is next, that you're not out of the woods, you're not done with this guy. This chapter in your book, it's not closed. But that's very much how Andy acted. He immediately became a fat and happy fighter in the 2 months that followed the first fight. That's how he handled success, or mishandled it. I mean, to be completely honest, if I haven't been already, but if Andy Ruiz finds himself in this predicament, it has more to do with Andy Ruiz than anybody else, than any trainer that he can swap out for any other trainer. It's going to take Andy, deep down inside, to dig deep down inside and make the commitment, make the effort, because no matter what trainer you got, they can't make the effort for you. You can change your ambiance, you can change who is around you, but ultimately it's going to have to come from you, regardless of what is along the perimeter. You know, so I don't know what's going to happen with Andy moving forward. I believe that Andy has it within him to get back to his winning ways. I believe that. I believe that Andy is still a formidable fighter. I believed he was a formidable fighter ahead of the first Anthony Joshua fight, when everybody had little more to say than quips about his weight and his appearance, his aesthetic. I told people, this guy can be lethal. Don't look past him. So I still believe, even now, in defeat, that Andy can get back to his winning ways. But it really does have less to do with who his trainer is and who he is as a fighter.